Magine standing in Washington, D.C., right in the middle of Constitution Avenue. On one side looms the U.S. Capitol, home of Congress. On the other side, down Pennsylvania Avenue, stands the White House, home of the President. It is here, symbolically and literally, that the great conversation between the legislative and executive branches takes place. This conversation is as old as the Republic itself, and it's not always polite. 1. The Founders' Design. The framers of the Constitution were deeply worried about concentrated power. They had just fought a war against a king, so they split governing authority between a legislature to make laws and an executive to carry them out. But they didn't make them completely independent. They gave each the tools to check the other. Congress was given the power of the purse, the ability to create laws, declare war, and confirm appointments. The president was given the veto, the role of commander-in-chief, the power to appoint leaders, and the duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. From the very beginning, this relationship was a careful dance between cooperation and competition. 2. How they work together. Most of the time, Congress and the president must cooperate to get things done. Legislation. A bill passed by Congress must be signed by the president to become law. For example, in 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson worked closely with Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act. He negotiated with lawmakers, promised political favors, and urged moral leadership. Budget. Every year, the president proposes a budget, but Congress has to approve it. The budget cannot become reality without both branches agreeing. Appointments. Presidents appoint cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and judges, but those choices need Senate confirmation. In the best moments, this process is a productive partnership where the legislative and executive branches amplify each other's strengths. 3. How they clash. But in other moments, it's like two stubborn mules pulling in opposite directions. Veto power. If Congress sends the president a bill he doesn't like, he can veto it. Congress can override the veto, but only with a 2/3 majority in both houses, a very high bar. Oversight. Congress can investigate the president's actions through hearings and subpoenas. During the Watergate scandal, congressional hearings exposed the extent of President Nixon's involvement in a cover-up. War powers. The president may order military action, but Congress controls funding. This tension was on display during the Vietnam War, when Congress eventually restricted military funding, effectively ending U.S. involvement. 4. Historical moments of interaction. Let's look at 3 snapshots in time. Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, 1930s. During the Great Depression, Roosevelt pushed an ambitious set of programs. Congress passed many of them, but when the Supreme Court struck down key laws, FDR tried to pack the court. Congress, controlled by his own party, said no. Even in times of crisis, Congress kept its independence. Ronald Reagan and Congress, 1980s. Reagan was a Republican president with a Democratic-controlled House. While he and Congress clashed over domestic spending, they worked together on tax reform in 1986, showing that even political rivals can find common ground. Obama and the Affordable Care Act, 2010. President Obama worked with a Democratic-controlled Congress to pass sweeping healthcare reform. But once Republicans gained control of the House, they repeatedly tried to repeal or defund it, leading to budget showdowns and even a government shutdown. 5. Why this relationship matters. The relationship between Congress and the president is not a flaw, it's the point. It forces negotiation. It slows rash decision-making. It requires leaders to think about public opinion, political alliances, and constitutional boundaries. But it also means progress can be slow. Gridlock is not unusual. In fact, it's built into the system as a safeguard against one branch dominating the other. So let's look at how the Congress was first supposed to run before we change things. This section is called When the People Took the Senate. Picture the United States Capitol in the year 1900. The House of Representatives is bustling, filled with members elected directly by the people. Across the Capitol, the Senate chambers are quieter, but the real action for those seats happens far away, in state capitals. Back then, senators weren't chosen by voters at all. State legislatures picked them. On paper, this was a way to protect state power in the new federal government. Senators were meant to be the ambassadors of their state governments to Washington, D.C. Their job was to guard state interests against federal overreach, but in reality, the process didn't always live up to that noble vision. In some states, powerful political machines pulled the strings. Party bosses traded favors and made backroom deals to decide who would go to Washington. Sometimes, state legislatures couldn't agree at all. Delaware famously went 2 years without filling a Senate seat because of political deadlock. The push for change. By the early 20th century, the progressive era was in full swing. Reformers argued that this old system was undemocratic and corrupt. Newspapers ran stories of senators. Sometimes it's a friendly handshake, other times a tense standoff. But whether in cooperation or conflict, this exchange between Congress and the president is the heartbeat of American democracy. It also changed their political orientation. The old Senate had been more insulated from the swings of public opinion. The new Senate became more attuned to voter concerns, more sensitive to shifts in mood, and more tied to national political parties. Senators increasingly aligned with party platforms, not just the interests of their state legislatures. A shift in power. This reform also altered the balance of federal power. Before 1913, state legislatures had a direct hand in federal lawmaking through their senators. That connection weakened with direct elections. The Senate became more of a national political body and less of a council of state representatives. Some saw this as a victory for democracy. Ordinary citizens now had more control. Others worried it weakened the state's voice in Washington, making it easier for the federal government to expand its power. Congress, after the amendment. After the 17th Amendment, the Senate began to look and act more like the House in some ways. Both chambers now faced similar electoral pressures. Senators, like representatives, needed to think about public opinion, upcoming elections, and national party goals. It also changed how the Senate interacted with the president. Presidents now campaigned for senators of their own party and took their case directly to the people, knowing that public opinion could sway Senate votes. The relationship between the two branches became more public, more political, and more influenced by the media. Closing thought. The 17th Amendment did more than change how senators were elected. It changed who they answered to, how they did their jobs, and even how the federal government worked. It transformed the Senate from a quiet chamber of state-appointed guardians into a high-profile arena of national politics. When the people took the Senate, they didn't just change an election process. They rewrote the relationship between the states, the people, and the federal government, a relationship that still shapes Congress today. Ratified the 17th Amendment. From that point forward, senators would be chosen the same way representatives were, by direct popular vote. A different kind of senator. The change was dramatic. Suddenly, senators had to win the hearts and minds of an entire state's voters. They were no longer accountable just to a small group of legislators. They were accountable to hundreds of thousands, even millions of citizens. That meant campaigning. It meant speeches, rallies, newspaper interviews, and, later, radio and television appearances. It also meant fundraising, because statewide campaigns are expensive. This brings us to when the president can veto Congress. The presidential veto, saying no to Congress. Imagine Congress has just passed a bill. It's gone through all the debates, survived committee hearings, and cleared both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Supporters are celebrating. Opponents are disappointed. But the bill's journey isn't over yet. It now travels a short distance from the U.S. Capitol to the White House. And here is where the president, armed with a powerful constitutional tool, can stop it in its tracks. That tool is the veto. 1. The constitutional power. The U.S. Constitution gives the president the authority to reject any bill passed by Congress. This is called the presidential veto, and it serves as a check on the legislative branch. It ensures that the president has a voice in the lawmaking process, not just in enforcing the laws, but also in preventing laws he or she believes are harmful, unconstitutional, or politically unwise. 2. How it works. When Congress passes a bill, it is sent to the president. At this point, the president has 10 days, excluding Sundays, to take action. There are 3 possible outcomes. Sign the bill, T. Sometimes it's a friendly handshake, other times a tense standoff. But whether in cooperation or conflict, this exchange between Congress and the president is the heartbeat of American democracy. There's also a special type of veto called a pocket veto. If Congress adjourns during the 10-day window and the president has not signed the bill, it simply dies. There's no chance for Congress to override because they are no longer in session. 5. Historical examples. Franklin D. Roosevelt used the veto more than any other president, over 600 times, often to block spending bills he considered wasteful. Andrew Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, but Congress overrode his veto, one of the most important overrides in U.S. history. George W. Bush vetoed a bill to expand children's health insurance in 2007, arguing it was too costly. Congress tried to override, but failed to reach the 2/3 mark. 6. Why it matters. The veto power is not just a political tool, it's a constitutional safeguard. It forces Congress to consider the president's perspective and encourages negotiation before bills even reach the White House. In practice, the threat of a veto can shape legislation long before it is passed. Gress with a formal message explaining the reasons for rejection. This is called a veto message. 3. Overriding a veto. A veto is powerful, but it is not the final word. The framers designed the system so Congress could override a veto if enough lawmakers strongly disagreed with the president. To override a veto, the bill must be approved again by 2/3 of the members in both the House and the Senate. If both chambers reach that threshold, the bill becomes law despite the president's objections. This is difficult to achieve, which is why most vetoes stick. 4. The pocket veto. Closing thought. So, as we picture Constitution Avenue again, Think of it as more than a stretch of pavement. It's a symbolic reminder that governing in America is a constant conversation. Sometimes it's a friendly handshake, other times a tense standoff. But whether in cooperation or conflict, this exchange between Congress and the President is the heartbeat of American democracy.